Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu and with me is Renuka, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. France President Emmanuel Macron says Prime Minister Narendra Modi was right when he said that the time is not for war. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar discusses several issues, including Ukraine conflict, with his Turkish counterpart on the sidelines of UN General Assembly in New York. Military mobilization ordered in Russia by President Vladimir Putin for protection of Moscow's territorial integrity. In Iran, protests continue against custodial death of a woman over the hijab issue. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres strongly condemns the attack by government troops on a school in Myanmar, and veteran Assamese swimmer Elvis Ali Hazarika becomes the first from the northeast to cross the North Channel. French President Emmanuel Macron has said that Prime Minister Narendra Modi was right when he said that the time is not for war. Mr. Macron said this while addressing the ongoing 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York City last night. The statement of Mr. Macron came in reference to Prime Minister Modi and Russia's President Vladimir Putin's conversation, where Mr. Modi had said that today's era is not of war. Prime Minister Modi spoke this during a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Uzbekistan, Samarkand. Responding to PM Modi, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that he knows about India's position on the Ukraine conflict and we want all of this to end as soon as possible. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan also said that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's dialogue, "This is not the time for war in Ukraine," with Russian President Vladimir Putin was a statement of principle on behalf of what he believes is right and welcomed by the United States. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar met Foreign Minister of Turkey Mevlut Çavuşoğlu on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. In a tweet, Dr. Jaishankar said there were wide-ranging conversations that covered the Ukraine conflict, food security, G20 processes, global order, NAM and Cyprus. The External Affairs Minister thanked French President Emmanuel Macron for hosting a high-level cross-regional grouping in New York today. He said the discussions focused on the conflict in Ukraine and its implications for the global South. Dr. Jaishankar said the conversations also covered salience of the G20 in these challenging times. Earlier, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held bilateral talks with the President of Comoros, Azali Assoumani, and discussed taking forward development partnership and maritime security between the two countries. Mr. Jaishankar, who arrived in the U.S. on a 10-day visit, had also met his Nicaragua counterpart, Denis Moncada, and discussed the global situation and its multilateral implications. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that the world is in big trouble and needs collective action across the board. Guterres, while addressing the UN General Assembly before the opening of the general debate, has said that our world is in big trouble. Divides are growing deeper, inequalities are growing wider, and challenges are spreading farther. He also said that we need action across the board. He said crises like the conflict in Ukraine, climate emergency and biodiversity loss, and the dire financial situation of developing countries threaten the very future of humanity and the fate of the planet. He added that progress on all these issues and more is being held hostage to geopolitical tensions. UN General Assembly President Chaba Qureshi echoed Guterres' alarm at the global situation and also the hope. Qureshi said that a landmark agreement on commercial grain exports from the world's breadbasket offers hope. Decrying the paralyzing polarization of the geopolitical divides, Guterres warned that the world was descending into chaos with not even two groups.
Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a partial mobilization of 300,000 reservists with immediate effect to fight in Ukraine. In a rare televised address to the nation, Putin said he will use all available means to protect his people if his country is threatened. He said the move is necessary under the circumstances. Putin has also accused the West of engaging in nuclear blackmail against Russia and said that the country has lots of weapons to reply. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu claimed that mobilizing the country's reserves will add around 300,000 civilians to the armed forces and students will be exempted from the exercise. The step which Russia took is the first since World War II. Immediately after Putin's announcement, China urged all parties to engage in dialogue and consultation. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin in a press briefing said that Beijing called on the relevant parties to realize a ceasefire through dialogue and consultation and find a solution that accommodates the legitimate security concerns of all parties as soon as possible. In the meantime, British Foreign Office Minister Gillian Keegan also reacted to Putin's speech and said it was a worrying escalation and that the threats the Russian president made must be taken seriously.
Western nations have condemned Moscow's plans to hold urgent referendum in parts of Ukraine that are currently under Russian control. According to media reports, the votes have been called by Russian-backed officials in 4 Ukrainian regions to ask whether they should become part of Russia. The US, Germany and France have said that they would never recognize the results of such ballots. The U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that the U.S. would never recognize the votes. On the other hand, pro-Russian leaders in the 4 Ukrainian regions have supported the referendum. The head of the administration in Luhansk, Leonid Pasechnik, said it was our common dream and our common future. The deputy head of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, said that the votes would restore historical justice and be irreversible. The NATO military alliance said that the plan spelled an escalation in the war. Russian plans to run polls for 5 days and it starts on Friday in the eastern regions of Luhansk and Donetsk as well as Zaporizhia and Kherson in south. The United Nations has demanded an independent investigation into the death of an Iranian woman, Mahsa Amini, in the custody of Iran's morality police, but authorities have denied allegations that she was beaten or mistreated. Nada al-Nashif, the acting UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, said on Tuesday that Mahsa Amini's tragic death and allegations of torture and ill treatment must be promptly, impartially and effectively investigated by an independent, competent authority. The UN Human Rights Office said Iran's morality police have expanded their patrols in recent months, targeting women for not properly wearing hijab, a scarf worn by some Muslim women. The European Union spokesperson for External Affairs said the incident leading to Amini's death was unacceptable and that the perpetrators of this killing must be held accountable. A United Nations report presented on Tuesday has claimed that Venezuelan security services under the direction of President Nicolas Maduro have committed crimes against humanity in an effort to quash political opposition in the country. The report, compiled by UN's Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Venezuela, outlines the extensive use of arbitrary arrest and torture in Venezuela since 2014. Findings were based on interviews with 471 victims, their families and their legal representatives. It also interviews another 50 individuals who work for Venezuela's General Office of Military Counterintelligence, National Intelligence Service and other government entities. It also rebukes Venezuelan authorities for failing to hold abusers accountable.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on India at the United Nations General Assembly. In conversation are Anil Badwa, former ambassador, and Manish Anand, journalist.
77th session of the United Nations General Assembly has begun. As Jaishankar, the Indian External Affairs Minister, would be representing India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Chinese President Xi Jinping, and the Russian President Vladimir Putin would not be attending in person. The theme of the meeting is Watershed Moment, Transformative Solutions to Interlocking Challenges. Ambassador Wadhwa, this session is taking place at quite a challenging moment. The specter of war is hanging in Europe, and the consequent crises like energy and the food are being faced by many countries. How do you think the session would be significant in the near future?
So obviously, dominant theme would be the war in Europe, particularly in Ukraine, and the consequent fallout of this conflict in the rest of the world. Most of the countries in Europe would be using this occasion at the United Nations General Assembly to bring out the issues regarding what they call aggression of Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine. And the rest of the world, of course, is more concerned about more existential issues and the fallout of this conflict. Now, as you know, that the world is not free of other conflicts, but the main issue of the aggression of China, for example, in the South China Sea, on the Indo-Chinese border, and incursions in the Western Pacific, etc., are at the back of minds of people. The Taiwan crisis is also at the back of minds of countries. But at the same time, will be on the back burner because of the burning issues in Ukraine. And a recurring theme, of course, is the transformation which is taking place in the world because of technological changes, and how the world is going to cope with that. The UNGA president has also given a call for the UNGA to tackle these issues, talk about them, and at the same time, he has given priority to UN reform, which makes a very interesting agenda for the 77th UNGA.
Ambassador Wadhwa, Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the past had given 5 As for the World Forum at the United Nations. Samman, Samvad, Sahyog, Shanti, Samriddhi. These 5 As's encompassed the whole philosophy of the Indian Prime Minister in his approach to number of world issues. And when he met the Russian President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, he reiterated the peace aspirations of the world, that the era is no more of war, which has in fact, Ambassador Wadhwa, been stressed by the French president in his address at the UNGA. So how do you think that the 5 S's, the Prime Minister, would be relevant in the current session?
So obviously, India has been pushing for peace and prosperity in the world, and the 5 S's were spelled out in detail earlier with this in mind. Also, the fact that the world is very globalized in today's context, and therefore, unless there is cooperation and coordination amongst all countries of the world, especially at the United Nations, these problems that are facing the world today will be very difficult to solve. And the fact that the Prime Minister mentioned the fact that today is not the time for war is a factual comment. I think the French president and perhaps others from the Western world will also use this in order to browbeat the Russian president, and also to say that even countries like India, for example, which are closely aligned with Russia, do not support this war in Ukraine. So that is to be expected, of course. What the Prime Minister said was in the context of the fact that there are too many problems which are facing the world, and that problems should be concentrated upon rather than trying to solve issues through conflict. So I presume this is something which will be understood by most countries, but of course the statement can be used by many in a different context, as has been done already by the French president.
Ambassador Wadhwa, EM Jaishankar would be addressing the UNGA on 24th. And the immediate concerns for India indeed would be countering terrorism. At the same time, we have taken the agenda of reform of the multilateral bodies equally. Besides, climate action is equally a great and grave concern for a number of countries, including India. And also the equitable access to critical pandemic interventions like vaccines and medicines. In countering terrorism, we have seen that China has blocked the designation of a number of terrorists at the UN forum. So do you think that the United Nations hasn't lived up to the expectations in countering terrorism?
Well, as we know that India has been tabling this resolution on terrorism since 1996 at the UNGA. It enjoys wide demonstrate support, but there is no conformity or there is no consensus on the definition of terrorism even today. Obviously, those who are not interested in finding common text are finding that as an excuse, and this state of affairs will continue most likely at this forthcoming UNGA as well. That doesn't stop countries like India from articulating the concerns. In fact, the threat of terrorism is now felt across the globe. Most countries who were left untouched earlier are also facing the brunt of terrorism, and many countries have come together now to bring about a coalition, so to speak, of countries in order to counter terrorist influences, especially cross-border terrorism, which is India's main concern. On the reform of the multilateral system, the climate change action, and also the equitable allocation of resources for pandemic intervention, these are, of course, ongoing themes which have been important for many countries for the past many years. I guess there is a lot of momentum nowadays on climate action because not much has been achieved. Many countries who are taking some action have been stopped dead in their tracks because of lack of finances and also because of the global situation and the fallout of the Ukraine war, for instance, which has pushed up energy prices, which has created a food insecurity in many countries, especially in Asia and in Africa, and at the same time has brought about difference in attitude towards fossil fuels and how to reduce them and in what time frame, etc. On the issue of China, I think the China-Pakistan nexus is now quite well known and established, and China does not want to act in any manner which harms its all-weather ally Pakistan. The technical hold that it puts repeatedly on known terrorist offenders is testimony to that. I presume that this action will continue at this UNGA, and perhaps after a while, once Pakistan is satisfied or goes ahead, gives a green signal, then the Chinese will lift that ban. This is a repeated pattern which has been happening. And countries like these need to be called out, which many countries have started to do now. Of course, India has taken the lead in the past, but this was actually a joint proposal by the United States and by India against a mastermind who actually masterminded terrorist attacks in India. And therefore, it is not at all explicable that the Chinese still insist on technical holds while there is widespread evidence against the offender. We always keep saying in the UNGA and otherwise bilateral meetings with other countries that one day this will come back to bite the Chinese themselves. If terrorism raises its head in Xinjiang or in other parts of China, it will then realize that it's making a big mistake by not supporting repeated offenders of terrorism and getting blindsided by what the Pakistanis have to tell the Chinese.
Indeed, Ambassador Wadhwa, one interesting aspect is that while we have been stressing on the expansion of the Security Council of the United Nations, which essentially reflect the Second World War, immediate years of the Second World War, post-war era. And a lot of waters have flown in the rivers, and still we find that the countries are still blocking the efforts to expand the Security Council. Do you think that the United Nations really represent the today's world in democratic manner?
So the world has changed drastically since after the Second World War, when the United Nations systems was formed. At that point in time, it was largely the countries who ended up on the victorious side. And also at that point in time, there were certain countries with a much higher GDP. But today we have a number of countries which have overtaken them. India, for example, has overtaken the United Kingdom. India contributes a lot to the United Nations peacekeeping operations. It is probably going to become the world's largest populous state. Already it is a population of 1.4 billion people, representing more than 1/6 of humanity. It is a major player and has a major voice in all finding solutions to the major problems in the world today. And without countries like India, and the other G4 countries like Japan, Germany or Brazil, the United Nations Security Council lacks the representation that it should in today's context. On the other hand, certain countries who do not deserve to be there are still hanging on to their positions in the United Nations Security Council. India is not saying they should not be there, but India is saying that the Security Council should be expanded to include legitimately those who actually deserve to be there. It's only then that it will be able to solve the major problems which confront the world. And by all accounts, India's qualifications are right up there as far as the membership of the UN Security Council is concerned.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa, for sharing your insight with us.
Thank you very much.
This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned the attack by government troops on a school in Leyte Nyet Khon in Sagaing region in Myanmar. The attack, which took place last Friday, left 13 people dead, including 11 school children. The Secretary General Guterres extended his deepest condolences to the families of those killed in the school attack. In a statement released by his spokesperson on Tuesday, the UN Secretary General said that even in times of armed conflict, schools must remain areas in which children are granted protection and a safe place to learn. Attacks on schools and hospitals in contravention of international humanitarian law also constitute one of the 6 grave violations against children in times of armed conflict strongly condemned by the Security Council, said the statement. The UN Secretary General reiterated that under international humanitarian law, combatants must not direct attacks against civilians, including children or civilian objects. The perpetrators of international crimes committed in Myanmar must be held accountable, the statement concluded. It was reported by the local media that the community school was first attacked by the helicopters, after which infantry troops attacked the school inside a monastery. Veteran Assamese swimmer Elvis Ali Hazarika has become the first from the northeast to cross the North Channel. The North Channel is the strait between northeastern Northern Ireland and southwestern Scotland. Elvis and his team clocked a timing of 14 hours 38 minutes to achieve this feat. With this, Elvis has become the oldest Indian swimmer to cross the North Channel. A report.
Hazarika began his journey in the United States and swam over 80 kilometers in a time of 10 hours and 59 minutes to reach his destination in Mexico. He was accompanied by West Bengal swimmer Rimo Saha, who swam alongside him for over 4 hours. Hazarika risked his life crossing the Catalina Channel, which is home to a wide variety of dangerous aquatic species, particularly sharks. The Catalina Channel, formerly known as the San Pedro Channel, which connects Santa Catalina Island to the mainland of Southern California, is regarded as one of the world's most historically important and continuously popular marathon swims. Hazarika remarked, "It was a challenging task since we swam with very large fish and couldn't see well at night owing to the lack of light. For me and the people of Assam, this is a dream come true." This is Anubha Rohatgi with Pratyush Ghosh's report, AIR News, Delhi.
Forces in Ethiopia's Tigray region say Eritrea has launched a full-scale offensive and heavy fighting was taking place in several areas along the border in what appears to be an escalation of last month's renewal of fighting. The Eritreans are fighting alongside Ethiopian federal forces, including commando units, as well as allied militias, said Getachew Reda, spokesman for the Tigray People's Liberation Front, TPLF, on Tuesday. There was no immediate comment from authorities in Ethiopia or Eritrea, which lies north of Tigray. A humanitarian worker in the northern Ethiopian town of Adigrat told the Associated Press that Eritrean forces were shelling the surrounding areas. The U.S. Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa said the United States was aware of Eritrean troops crossing into Ethiopia's Tigray region. Hurricane Fiona was headed northward after it bore down on the tiny Turks and Caicos archipelago yesterday and caused severe damage on Puerto Rico and then the Dominican Republic. According to U.S. officials, at least 5 people have died in the storm, 4 in Puerto Rico and 1 in Guadeloupe earlier this week. Fiona made landfall in Puerto Rico on Sunday afternoon, dumping huge amounts of rainfall on it and then on the Dominican Republic on Monday. A public health emergency was declared by U.S. Health Secretary Xavier Becerra for Puerto Rico yesterday night, which allows freeing up of federal funds and equipment to assist the island. Fiona hit the Grand Trunk, the Turks, and Caicos' biggest island earlier in the day, before slamming its main cluster of islands several hours later. The Power Category 3 storm dumped heavy rains, triggering floods on the Caribbean archipelago. The U.S. National Hurricane Center NHC said that the hurricane had moved 75 miles north of Turks and Caicos by Tuesday night and was strengthening with wind speeds of 125 miles per hour. However, no casualties in Turks and Caicos reported till yet.
The World Health Organization today said that it is in close contact with the Ministry of Health in Uganda to provide a rapid response after it confirmed the outbreak of case Ebola virus disease EVD in the central region of the country. Earlier in the day, the Health Ministry of Uganda said in a series of tweets that a confirmed case of Ebola virus was reported in the Mubende district in the central region of Uganda. The patients diagnosed with symptoms later succumbed. And now, a report from the business world.
The Sensex lost 263 points or 0.44% to close at 59,457. The Nifty slipped 98 points or 0.55% to end at 17,718. At global stock markets, Asian stock markets fell following losses in the U.S. share markets ahead of the Fed decision over the interest rate hike to arrest inflation. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index stumbled 1.8%, Japan's Nikkei 225 plunged 1.4%, and South Korea's Kospi declined 0.9%. China's Shanghai Composite Index and Singapore's Straits Times both closed 0.2% down. European shares were up in intraday trade. Brent crude prices jumped more than 1.5% after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a partial military mobilization, escalating the war in Ukraine and raising concerns of tighter oil and gas supply. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading at $92.35 per barrel. Anubha Rohatgi for World News, All India Radio.
The World Bank Vice President for South Asia, Martin Razor, called on Bangladesh Finance Minister A.H.M. Mustafa Kamal in Dhaka yesterday. Martin Razor had arrived on a 3-day visit to Bangladesh on Monday. The finance minister called the World Bank an important development partner of Bangladesh. He thanked the World Bank for its support to various projects of the government in health, education, power, disaster management and other sectors. He gave special thanks to the World Bank for its budgetary support during the COVID-19 pandemic. In Australia, more than 200 whales have beached themselves in a mass stranding in Tasmania. According to media reports, the whales were discovered in Macquarie Harbour, the same location where the country's worst stranding occurred exactly 2 years ago. Half of the whales appear to be still alive, yet as per reports. The reason for this stranding is unknown. Meanwhile, whale rescuers have been sent to help. According to Tasmania's Environment Department, experts are planning a rescue, but the operation will be complex due to the location. International Cricket Council today released rankings for batters in men's T20 International. India's Surya Kumar Yadav continued to rise in the ICC rankings as the India batter surpassed Pakistan captain Babar Azam. Surya Kumar is now number 3 on the batting charts with 780 points, 9 more than Babar, who had led the rankings until earlier this year.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Guardian reports UK businesses given 6-month emergency energy price cap. The Globe and Mail writes Canada sails warship through Taiwan Strait. The Washington Post reports Bank of Korea denies imminent U.S. swap deal as one falls. The Wall Street Journal reports high natural gas prices push European manufacturers to shift to the U.S. The Japan Times reports man protesting against Japan's state funeral sets himself on fire near PM office.
And now a quick look at the headlines once again. France President Emmanuel Macron says Prime Minister Narendra Modi was right when he said that the time is not for war. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar discusses several issues, including Ukraine conflict, with his Turkish counterpart on the sidelines of UN General Assembly in New York. Military mobilization ordered in Russia by President Vladimir Putin for protection of Moscow's territorial integrity. In Iran, protests continue against custodial death of a woman over the hijab issue. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres strongly condemns the attack by government troops on a school in Myanmar, and veteran Assamese swimmer Elvis Ali Hazarika becomes the first from the northeast to cross the North Channel. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Malta on their Independence Day. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.